I've never been one to believe in bizarre stories. I always thought most strange events had logical explanations, but what happened to me during my second year of college still haunts me, even years later. Back then, I had just moved into a house near campus with two roommates, Jake and Sarah. It was an old, somewhat worn-down house, but the location was perfect, and the rent fit our tight student budgets. I had a small room upstairs, while Jake and Sarah shared the main floor. The only space we rarely explored was the basement. It was damp, full of old junk, and honestly gave off a creepy vibe from the start, but we only used it to store boxes and things we didn't need on a daily basis. The first few days were pretty uneventful. We spent most of our time out, between classes and parties, but after a few weeks, I started noticing things that didn't add up. Sometimes I'd leave my notebook on my desk, only to find it on the other side of the table when I came back. Little things, you know, like my favorite mug, which I always kept in the cabinet, showing up on the counter even when I hadn't used it. At first I thought I was imagining things, or that my roommates were moving stuff around without realizing it. I mentioned it to Jake and Sarah, but they just laughed and said I was stressed from all the exams. Then came the night when everything stopped being funny. It was a Tuesday, really late, and I was in the living room finishing up some notes. Jake and Sarah had already gone to bed. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound, like footsteps coming from downstairs. At first, I thought it was one of them, but when I called out their names, there was no response. The house went quiet again, but after a few minutes, I heard another noise. This time, it sounded like a door creaking. My heart raced, but I convinced myself it was just the wind moving a loose window. Deep down, though, I knew that wasn't the case. Over the next few days, I started noticing more strange things. Sometimes, I'd wake up in the middle of the night with the unsettling feeling of being watched. I wouldn't see anyone, but the sensation was so strong that I started locking my door at night. Sarah also mentioned smelling food in the middle of the night, even though no one had been in the kitchen. Jake told us he found the bathroom door locked one morning, even though none of us admitted to using it. Things were getting harder and harder to ignore. One Saturday night after a party, we all came home together. We were laughing and joking, but as soon as we opened the door, the atmosphere changed. There was this tension in the air, like someone else was there with us. Jake went straight to the kitchen to grab some water but stopped in the doorway, staring at the floor. There were crumbs scattered around, and none of us remembered leaving them there. "Could it be rats?" Sarah asked, but her tone didn't sound convinced. I stepped closer to take a look and noticed something strange. Among the crumbs was a footprint, small and dirty, but unmistakably human. The idea of someone being in our house started to feel less ridiculous. The next day, we decided to search the entire house. We checked every room, closet, and even the attic, but nothing seemed out of place. Finally, we decided to take a look at the basement, even though we all felt uneasy about it. Jake went down first, holding a flashlight that barely lit up the damp and stuffy space. Down there, it was the same mess as always. Stacked boxes, old furniture, and an almost unbearable musty smell. But as we moved things around, I found something that froze me completely. An open pack of crackers and a half-empty water bottle hidden behind a pile of boxes. Sarah turned pale. "That's not ours," she said, her voice trembling. We stood there exchanging uneasy glances, until Jake suggested it might be a homeless person using the basement as a shelter. That idea made sense but was still deeply unsettling. We decided to reinforce the locks on the doors and stay more vigilant. I thought that would solve the problem, but what happened that night made me realize we were dealing with something much worse. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, slow, dragging steps. I got up and carefully opened my door. The hallway was empty, but the sound continued, this time coming from the stairs leading to the basement. My heart pounded, but instead of going downstairs, I ran to Jake's room and woke him up. Together, we grabbed a baseball bat and headed toward the basement. When we reached the top of the basement stairs, the sound stopped. Jake turned on the light, and everything seemed quiet. But something was different. The basement door, which we always kept propped shut with a chair, was slightly open. "I was sure we locked that," I muttered. We carefully descended the stairs, trying not to make any noise. The smell of mildew was stronger than ever, and Jake's hand holding the flashlight was shaking. When we finally reached the bottom, we noticed one of the walls had a small hole, like an improvised passage. It looked like someone had been using it as an entryway. That discovery changed everything. It was obvious that someone had been living there with us, without our knowledge. We were terrified, but Jake decided to block the hole with some heavy boxes and a chair. "If this person tries to come back, at least we'll hear it," he said, trying to sound confident. Sarah was in shock and suggested calling the police, but Jake and I hesitated. After all, we didn't have any proof that someone was still there. We decided to wait until morning to figure out what to do. That night was the longest of my life. Every little sound made my heart race, and I barely got any sleep. The next morning, we went about our day as usual, heading to our classes, but the tension between us was palpable. When we came back that evening, the scene was even more disturbing. The boxes we had placed over the hole were moved, and the chair had been pushed aside. Jake, who usually stayed calm, was visibly shaken. "This is serious. We need to deal with this now." He grabbed his phone and finally called the police. 2 officers showed up within half an hour and inspected the entire house, including the basement. They didn't find anyone, but they confirmed that the marks on the floor and the hole indicated that someone had been there. The officers suggested we change the locks and install security cameras, but the landlord, when we contacted him, seemed unconcerned. He revealed something that made us even more uncomfortable. The previous tenant had been evicted for not paying rent, but apparently he never returned the key. "He was kind of odd but seemed harmless," the landlord said, as if that was supposed to reassure us. Now we had a name and a vague description of a face, but that only made it feel more real and more frightening. Who's to say that man wasn't still nearby, watching us? We decided to take the police's recommendations seriously. Jake installed an extra lock on the basement door, and Sarah bought some cheap security cameras, which we placed in the hallways and living room. I didn't want to admit it, but I was living in a constant state of alert. On the 3rd night after the police visit, one of the cameras sent an alarm around 2 a.m. The monitor showed a distorted image, but it was clear enough to see someone. A skinny figure, with dirty clothes and messy hair, standing in the hallway near the basement. We ran outside and called the police again. This time they took it seriously and arrived armed. I've never been the kind of person to get too close to co-workers. I think deep down, we all keep a safe distance. But that night, back in early November, I made the mistake of breaking that rule. I'd stayed late at the office to finish a project, and I was exhausted. Public transport in the city was already running irregularly at that hour. That's when Mike, a new guy at work, offered me a ride home. He'd been with the company for about 3 months. A friendly enough guy, but kind of reserved. Up to that point, he was just another co-worker. At first, it seemed like an innocent offer. He had this old, beat-up blue sedan, but I was so tired I didn't care. I got in and thanked him for the ride. He asked where I lived, and I gave him the address. It wasn't far, about a 15-minute drive. The conversation started out normal. We talked about work, our annoying boss, the usual stuff. But as the streets grew emptier, the conversation took a strange turn. He began sharing personal stories, things that were surprisingly heavy, to be honest. Stuff about his childhood that no one would casually bring up. I remember exactly what he said because it sent a chill down my spine. Have you ever felt like there's something broken inside you? Like, you were born wrong? I didn't know how to respond, so I just muttered, "We all have our bad days, right?" But he laughed, a dry, uncomfortable laugh, and mumbled something like, "Yeah, but sometimes I wonder if one day it'll all just explode." After that, he went silent for a few seconds, just staring ahead. I should have asked him to let me out right then and there, but who does that? We always think we're overreacting. That's when I noticed he had missed the turn for my street. "Hey Mike, it was back there," I said, trying to sound casual. He didn't respond immediately. Then he turned to me with a crooked smile and said, "I'm taking you through a shortcut. It's quicker this way." My chest tightened. I knew the neighborhood well, and there was no shortcut in that direction. It was a road that led out of the city, a poorly lit, nearly deserted stretch. I tried to laugh it off nervously. "I think you made a mistake, Mike. Seriously, you can turn around." But he just gripped the wheel tighter and said, "Trust me." As the car sped down that deserted road, I started to feel a weight pressing on my chest. The silence inside the car was suffocating, broken only by the sound of the tires on the uneven asphalt. I looked out the window, trying to recognize something, anything, that might tell me where we were. But it was useless. Just widely spaced streetlights and the shadows of trees looming in the dark. I tried to strike up a conversation again, trying to keep calm, but my voice shook. "So, where's this shortcut? Feels like we're heading pretty far out." Mike didn't answer immediately. When he did, it was almost a whisper. "There's something I want to show you. It's important to me." My mind started racing with possibilities, each worse than the last. I thought about grabbing my phone to send a text, but when I reached for my pocket, I realized I'd left it on my desk back at the office. It felt like my entire body froze at that moment. I could barely breathe. Slowly, I turned to him and asked, "What is it you want to show me, Mike?" He chuckled softly, but it wasn't a normal laugh. It was like he was amused by my discomfort. "You'll understand. Just wait," he said, his eyes fixed on the road. Then he started talking about his childhood again, but this time, the details were even more disturbing. He mentioned how much he hated the way people used to look at him in school, like he was weird. He said he always felt out of place, even in his own family. "But you know what I realized?" he said, still wearing that unsettling smile. "I realized everyone has a dark side. Some people are just better at hiding it." My hands were slick with sweat as I tried to stay composed. I forced a smile, desperately trying to keep the situation under control. "Everyone has their struggles, Mike. That's normal." Suddenly, he swerved onto a dirt road, almost throwing me against the car door. "Mike, what are you doing? Let me out now." My voice finally broke the silence. He stopped the car for a second, looked at me with those cold eyes, and said, "You'll understand soon enough. I promise." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I started planning how I could get out. If he stopped the car again, I'd have to act fast. But the problem was, he looked much stronger than me. And worse, the road was surrounded by dense trees. If I ran, where would I go? He stopped the car abruptly in an open field that seemed completely off any map. The place was shrouded in almost tangible darkness, with only the car's headlights illuminating a small patch of ground. Before I could react, he turned off the engine and looked at me. No smile this time. "Now's the moment. You're about to see the real me." My body was frozen, but my mind screamed at me to do something, anything, to get out of there. As soon as he turned off the engine, the only sound was silence. Not a normal silence, but the kind that makes your ears hurt because it's so heavy. Mike just sat there staring into nothing ahead of the car. He seemed completely lost in his own thoughts. I took the chance to try the door, but of course, it was locked. He noticed my movement and chuckled softly. "You think you can just leave? Trust me. "This is going to be good for you too," he said, as if we were having a normal conversation. My heart felt like it was about to explode, but I tried to stay calm. "Mike, look, whatever it is you're planning, I don't want to be involved. Just let me go and I swear I won't tell anyone." My voice was shaky, but he didn't seem to care. He tilted his head, as if considering my offer, and then said something that made my blood run cold. "Do you really think this is about you? It's not. It never was." He opened the car door, got out, and started walking toward the front of the vehicle, disappearing almost entirely into the darkness. I knew that was my chance. As soon as he stepped out, I threw myself over the driver's seat, frantically searching for the button to unlock the doors. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me a few seconds to find it. But the moment I heard the click, I pulled the handle and bolted out of the car. I ran as fast as I could without looking back. My feet pounded against the loose dirt road, and I could feel the air burning in my lungs. The road seemed like a never-ending stretch of black, but I kept running. That's when I heard his footsteps. Heavy, fast, closing in behind me. He wasn't shouting, but the sound of him running was unmistakable. Somehow he caught up with me in seconds. I felt his hand clamp down on my arm with incredible force, yanking me backward. I hit the ground hard, the rough dirt scraping my arms and legs. "Why are you running?" he asked, his voice eerily calm, like I was the one overreacting. Before I could answer, he started dragging me back toward the car effortlessly. I struggled as much as I could, but he was far stronger than me. "You need to see this. You can't leave now," he said. That's when I saw something in his eyes. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was emptiness, like he was completely detached from any human emotion. I knew that if I didn't do something at that moment, things would end very badly for me. As he dragged me back to the car, my entire body seemed to shift into survival mode. The pain in my arm where he gripped me was unbearable, but my instinct was screaming at me not to give up. I scanned the area desperately for anything that could help, and that's when I saw it. A large rock, partially buried in the dirt. Without thinking, I jerked forward suddenly, reaching out and grabbing the rock. In one quick, clumsy motion, I turned my body and struck him on the side of the head with all the strength I had. Mike screamed, stumbling backward and letting go of my arm. It was the opening I needed. I ran like I'd never run before, not looking back. My feet slipped on the loose dirt, and I could feel every muscle in my legs burning, but adrenaline pushed me forward. The road felt like a mirage in the distance, but I kept moving, focusing only on putting as much distance as possible between us. His footsteps grew fainter, and for a moment I started to believe I could get away. Almost. Then I heard the car engine start behind me. The sound froze me in place. I knew that if he wanted, he could catch up with me in seconds. I started screaming for help, even though I knew no one would be on that deserted road at this hour. My eyes scanned frantically for anything ahead, a place to hide, some kind of cover. That's when I saw it. A steep embankment covered in dense trees on the side of the road. It was risky, but it was my only option. Without hesitation, I leapt into the brush, branches scratching my skin as I tumbled onto the damp ground. I hid there, trying to control my breathing. The car's headlights swept across the trees, illuminating everything in a cold, cutting glow. The car slowed down, and I heard the door open. Mike stepped out, calling my name. He sounded calmer than before, which somehow made it even more terrifying. "I know you're out there," he said, his voice drawn out, as if he had all the time in the world. "You don't understand what you're missing. It didn't have to be like this." I stayed perfectly still, too afraid to even breathe. I could hear his footsteps approaching the embankment. My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. Then a sound broke through the silence. A car horn, faint but unmistakable, in the distance. Mike froze. He turned, probably trying to figure out if someone was really coming. For some reason, it made him hesitate. Slowly he walked back to his car, got in, and sped off down the road. I waited a few minutes before crawling out of my hiding spot. My entire body was trembling, and my legs felt like they could give out at any second. When I finally felt safe enough to return to the road, I started walking in the opposite direction, hoping to find help. Eventually, a pickup truck passed by and stopped. I told the driver a shortened version of the story, and they took me straight to the nearest police station. Since that night, I've never seen or heard from Mike again. He vanished from work, and apparently, from the city. The authorities investigated the case but never found anything conclusive. To this day, I don't know what he was planning that night, but I know I came within minutes of finding out. I've always been a creature of habit, you know? The kind of person who takes the same route every day, at the same time, without fail. I work as a data analyst at a company downtown, so my day starts early and ends around 6 p.m. I always catch the 6:20 train from Central Station, and I even know the exact sound of the conductor's whistle signaling boarding time. It was just a normal Wednesday. Nothing special. The weather was a bit chilly, and the sky had that grayish tint of late afternoon. I was standing on platform 4 with my headphones on, listening to some random playlist while waiting for the train. The station was oddly quiet for that time of day, which I found strange but didn't dwell on it. As I stared at the tracks, I noticed someone approaching from my right. It was a man. He looked to be in his early 40s, wearing a slightly wrinkled blazer, a loose tie, and had a face that seemed familiar, but not in a comforting way. He smiled warmly and said something like, "Long day, huh?" I took out one of my earbuds and nodded politely, not wanting to seem rude but also not eager to chat. He didn't take the hint, though. "Do you always take the train at this time?" he asked. I found the question a bit random but answered with a simple, "Yeah." At that point, he just seemed like a regular guy trying to make small talk. The conversation started innocently enough. He mentioned the weather, asked if I worked nearby, and complained about how the trains were always running late. Nothing unusual. But then his questions started to shift. "You live alone, right?" he asked suddenly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. That made me stop in my tracks. How could he know that? I let out an awkward laugh and lied, saying I lived with roommates. He didn't look convinced but kept smiling. "Oh, got it. Your window has a great view of the park, doesn't it?" That's when my stomach dropped. I do live across from a park, but I've never mentioned that to anyone at the station. Narrowing my eyes, I asked, "Do we know each other?" He laughed like I'd just told a joke. "You don't recognize me?" That's when the unease settled in fully. I glanced around hoping to see more people nearby, but the platform was nearly empty. Just a few other passengers scattered in the distance, absorbed in their own worlds. The man kept smiling, but now his grin felt more like a mask than an expression. "Maybe we've crossed paths before, but don't worry, I know you well," he said, and my mind began racing. My heartbeat quickened, and a chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just weird, it was wrong. I tried to keep calm, but my mind was spinning. How could he know such specific things about me? I looked around again, hoping the train would arrive soon, but the digital board showed a 5-minute delay. "I'm not sure I understand," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice came out shakier than I intended. He tilted his head slightly like he was studying me. "Oh, you'll remember, in time," he replied, and this time there was something in his tone that made me want to run. It was as if he was enjoying the situation, but in a twisted, unsettling way. I decided to move further down the platform. I walked slowly toward the other end, but he followed me, keeping the same distance, almost like it was a game to him. "You always get that latte with no sugar at the little stand up front. The barista probably knows your name by now, don't you think?" he said, chuckling lightly. My stomach churned. He was right. I did always order the same thing. But how could he know that? It was such a trivial detail, but in that context, it was terrifying. My instincts were screaming at me to get out of there, but my legs felt heavy, as if fear had rooted me to the spot. "Who are you?" I asked, this time trying to sound firmer, but it didn't help. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he just stared at me, like he was deciding how much to reveal. "I'm just someone who pays attention," he finally said, and the simplicity of the phrase hit me like a punch to the gut. "Pays attention to what?" I pressed, trying not to let the growing panic show. He smiled again, that same frozen smile that seemed more like a reflex than a genuine expression. "Interesting people," he said, as if that explained everything. My mind was spinning. Had he been following me for weeks, months? Or was he just some lunatic with lucky guesses? While I tried to piece everything together, the board announced that the train was arriving. I felt a wave of relief, but the man didn't seem bothered at all by the idea of me escaping. "Well, it was nice meeting you today," he said casually. "We'll see each other again. Soon." Before I could respond, he turned and walked toward the other end of the platform, disappearing among the few passengers who were now gathering for the train. My heart was pounding as the train finally pulled up in front of me. I stepped onto the train and chose a seat near the door, where I could watch who got on. My heart was still racing, and my hands were trembling. That man. He seemed to know so much about me, yet I had never seen him before. As the train began to move, my eyes scanned the car, searching for him. Nothing. He hadn't boarded. That gave me a small sense of relief, but the unease lingered. I pulled my phone from my pocket, thinking about calling someone, maybe telling them what had just happened. But who would I call? Who would believe something like this without thinking I was paranoid? When the train reached my stop, I got off quickly and walked to my apartment. The walk wasn't far, but that night, every shadow seemed longer, every sound more threatening. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but I didn't see anyone. Still, the feeling of being watched never left me. When I finally made it inside, I locked the door immediately and checked all the windows. I tried convincing myself that he was just a weird stranger, someone I'd never see again. But as I kicked off my shoes and dropped my bag on the couch, there was still a voice in the back of my mind screaming that this wasn't normal. Later that night, while I was in the shower, I heard my phone buzz on the bathroom counter. I stepped out quickly, still dripping wet, to check. It was a message from an unknown number. "Did you get home safe?" it read. My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. How did he know my number? How did he know I'd made it home? My breathing quickened, and the thought that he might have followed me the entire way back made me freeze. I deleted the message immediately, but the fear had already taken hold. Suddenly, the apartment where I'd always felt safe now felt foreign, like it wasn't mine anymore. That night I barely slept. Every little noise made me jump. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering how he knew so much about me. How long had he been following me? Why me? I couldn't find any answers, only more questions. When I finally dozed off, I dreamed that he was standing outside my window, staring at me with that frozen smile. I woke up in a panic and decided I couldn't just let this go. The next morning, I went to the police station and told them everything that had happened. As I feared, the officer shrugged and said there wasn't much they could do without concrete evidence. I left feeling more helpless than ever. After that morning at the police station, I decided to change my routine. I started taking the train at different times and alternating the paths I took home, trying to avoid any patterns he might have been tracking. For a few days it worked. I didn't receive any more strange messages, and no one seemed to be following me. But the feeling of being watched never fully went away. I kept looking over my shoulder and avoided places that were too empty. Every person who made eye contact with me on the street felt suspicious. I knew I couldn't live like this forever, but I couldn't relax either. Everything changed again about a week later. I came home after work and found something strange at my door. It was a plain white envelope with no return address. My name was written on it in handwriting I didn't recognize, and inside was a single sheet of paper. "You're really interesting," the note read, followed by a photo of me taken at the train station. I was sitting on the bench at the platform, looking at my phone, on the very day I met that man. My heart almost stopped. He was still watching me, and now it felt like he was warning me that I'd never be out of his reach. After that, I decided to leave my apartment and stay with a friend for a while. I explained the situation to him, leaving out some details so I wouldn't sound completely paranoid. He agreed to let me crash at his place for a few days, but the anxiety didn't leave me. During that time, I contacted my building manager and asked to break my lease. Within a week, I managed to move to another neighborhood, a busier area where I hoped it would be harder for him to find me. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my co-workers. Now, months later, things seem to have settled down. I haven't received any more messages or found any mysterious envelopes. Even so, I can't feel completely safe. Every time I'm out in public, I stay alert for familiar faces or unusual movements. I still have nightmares about that man, that smile, those questions. I never learned who he was, or how he knew so much about me. Maybe I never will. But if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that the feeling of being watched can turn even the most ordinary places into scenes from a nightmare. And no matter how much I try to move on, part of me is always waiting for the next time we meet. I work as a cashier at a small-town convenience store, the kind of place that barely shows up on the map. It's one of those towns where everyone knows everyone, and any little change in the routine becomes the talk of the week. My shift was usually in the afternoon and evening, and I got to know all the regulars who came in at the same time every day. One of them was Mike. He was a homeless man who lived around town, always wearing the same worn-out jacket and carrying a tired but polite demeanor. Despite everything, he always greeted me with a "good evening" before asking for something simple, like a coffee or a cheap pack of crackers. He'd always pay in coins without fail. It was like a ritual. I paid more attention to Mike than I did to most customers. Not because he was homeless, but because he had this peculiar habit of disappearing for weeks at a time, and then reappearing as if nothing had happened. That wasn't too unusual for someone in his situation, but there was something about it that I couldn't quite put my finger on. During those absences, the town felt different, like something was missing. When he came back, he always looked more exhausted, but he never talked much about where he'd been. "Around," he'd say, with a faint, knowing smile. He was one of those people who seemed to carry a secret, but you couldn't tell what it was. Things started to get strange one Saturday morning when I decided to stop by the local market before my shift. I wasn't usually one to visit the market, but I needed a distraction that day. As I wandered through the stalls, I spotted a man from behind who looked a lot like Mike. I laughed to myself, thinking how everything seemed to remind me of him. But when I got closer, my smile disappeared. It was Mike, or at least someone who looked just like him. But this time, he was wearing a crisp button-down shirt, tailored slacks, and shiny leather shoes. His hair was neatly trimmed, and his face was clean-shaven, like something out of a catalog. I froze, unable to believe what I was seeing. He was behind a stall filled with electronics, talking to customers with a confidence I'd never seen in him before. He even had a different name, Dave, according to the name tag pinned to his shirt. I stood there trying to find some rational explanation. It didn't make sense. Mike was homeless and barely scraped together enough for food. How could he be standing there dressed like a businessman and selling electronics? I couldn't stop myself. I had to get closer to find out if it was really him, or if my mind was playing tricks on me. As I got closer, he saw me. His smile froze for a moment, but then it returned, as if I were just another customer. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, his voice steady and friendly, almost rehearsed. I was so stunned that I could barely respond. I just nodded and mumbled something like, "Just looking." But inside my mind was racing. I knew it was Mike, even with the disguise. It was impossible not to recognize the way he tilted his head when he spoke, or the intensity in his eyes, like he was always trying to read the person in front of him. I kept browsing the stall while he helped other customers. There was a bit of everything: phones, watches, headphones, even cameras. Everything looked new, but something felt off. The boxes were a little dented, and some didn't have their original seals. Plus, the prices were ridiculously low. It didn't take long for me to piece it together. These items had to be stolen. I didn't know how, but Mike, or Dave, as his name tag said, had found a way to transform his appearance and his life, at least temporarily. It was unsettling to see someone I knew as humble and reserved now tangled up in something so shady. I spent the rest of the day trying to get it out of my head, but it was impossible. When I arrived at the store for my shift, I was distracted and more paranoid than usual. Every customer who walked in made me wonder if they too had a hidden other side, like Mike. Deep down, I knew I needed answers, but I was too afraid to confront him directly. What if he was in some kind of dangerous trouble? What if digging too deep put me at risk too? Those questions swirled in my mind, and I barely noticed time passing. By the end of the week, I couldn't hold back anymore. I waited for the next Saturday market and went back, this time with a plan. My idea was simple: buy something from his stall and try to strike up a conversation. Anything that might give me a clue about what was really going on. When I got there, he seemed even more comfortable than the week before, joking with customers and even calling some of them by name. It was like he'd been living this life forever. I picked up a random pair of headphones and walked over to him. "How much for these?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He looked at me for a moment, maybe trying to figure out if I was there as a customer or something else. "For you?" $50, he said with a smile that was both friendly and cautious. I took the headphones and paid, trying to seem as indifferent as possible, but my mind was racing with questions. When he handed me the change, I took the chance to probe a little. "You look familiar. Have I seen you somewhere before?" I asked, casually. He laughed, but it wasn't genuine. It was forced, almost nervous. A lot of people say that. I guess I just have one of those faces. But I knew he was lying. His tone had changed, and his once relaxed eyes became sharper, like he was analyzing every word I said. I decided not to push any further. For some reason, I felt like I'd already gone too far for the day. In the weeks that followed, Mike, or Dave, disappeared from the convenience store, and his stall vanished from the market as well. The town went back to its usual rhythm, but my mind didn't. I became obsessed, trying to piece together the mystery. Who was Mike, really? How could he disappear and reappear with a new identity, new products, and act like nothing had happened? I asked a few people around town if they knew anything about him, but no one seemed to know much beyond the basics. "Oh, the homeless guy who hangs around. He's always been pretty quiet." Or it was as if he were a ghost, someone who only existed in the gaps between his absences. Months later, while stocking shelves at the store, I overheard two customers talking. They were chatting about a weird guy who'd been arrested in another town for selling stolen electronics. When they mentioned the name Dave, my stomach dropped. I pretended not to listen, but my heart was racing. The pieces were falling into place. Mike, or Dave, wasn't just a homeless man trying to get by. He was someone living a double life, someone who could vanish and reinvent himself whenever he needed to. The mystery only deepened, and I knew I'd never get all the answers. The most unsettling part was that, even knowing what he was capable of, I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't a bad person. Just someone trapped in a reality I'd never fully understand. To this day, I still think about him. Sometimes, when I pass someone on the street who seems familiar, my heart skips a beat, wondering if it's him again, with a new name and a new appearance. Maybe I'll never see him again, but that experience changed how I see people. Everyone has secrets, but some are deeper and darker than others. I'll never know who the real Mike was, but one thing is certain. He made me realize that sometimes the scariest thing isn't what we see, it's what we can't understand.